2025 is here, and the pace of change has never been faster. Are you ready to thrive in a world where AI accelerates everything, but can't replace the most essential human skills? That's why we've created a special 11-part series on the Learn It All podcast to help you master the skills needed to future-proof yourself and your career. From self-awareness to listening and developing trust, these are the traits that will make you irreplaceable in an ever-evolving workforce. I'm Damon Lemby, CEO of Learnit and two-time best-selling author, and I'll be your guide throughout the series. Joining me is Dr. Mickey Fitzcollins, Learnit's top-ranked facilitator and a leadership expert dedicated to helping you grow. This series is brought to you in partnership with our good friends at MuchSkills, a platform that helps organizations map and understand their workforce capabilities. Drawing from insight from their survey of over 28,000 professionals, we'll unpack 11 skills in this weekly series that will prepare you to thrive in an ever-evolving world. If you enjoy this episode, please take a moment to rate and review on your favorite podcast platform. Your feedback helps us share this message far and wide. Let's dive into today's top skill. Our skill that we're talking about today is learning agility. And I really believe, and I say this on podcasts all the time and to the customers, I really believe that learning agility could be the number one most important skill for today and in the future. So today, what I'd like to do is have you explain what learning agility is and why it's important. And I know that you're also going to share 3 actions to take to be a more agile learner. So let me just turn it over to you.
Yeah, right on, Damon. Yeah, thank you. And yeah, I'm super excited to talk about this topic. As you'll hear me mention, I'm sure I'll tell a story, of the opportunity to nerd out about nerdiness, right? But learning agility, we oftentimes hear that word agility or agile, and we think about like physical fitness, or maybe we think about project management and like the agile style, really. But what we're talking about with learning agility, this is one of the top skills, as you mentioned, top skills that any professional, any industry can exhibit on the day-to-day to be more successful in their career. And essentially what agility is it's about anticipating changes, trends, working yourself towards them. So learning, building skills, retooling yourself, reinventing yourself, instead of doing what I think a lot of people do, which is kind of like protect themselves or defend themselves away from that change. And so agility really is about leaning forward and really connects quite a bit actually to growth mindset. And, learning agility, as you mentioned, is super important. I think about even our motto at Learnit, companies grow when their people do, right? The organizations that are successful these days are the ones that are investing in their learning from the top all the way down to the bottom and everywhere in between. And it's super critical because our worlds and our ways of operating and our ways of doing business are rapidly changing. And so if we're not learning, if we're not keeping up with that, if we're not adapting, our businesses are over with, right? The skills that we had that were amazing and awesome skills 5 or 10 years ago may not even be relevant skills anymore. And, Damon, it's really scary and I don't know, it's dangerous to me when I see these organizations that maybe they're going through, there's a lot of companies that are going through tough economic times right now. It is a challenging economy. But it's very scary to me when I see organizations that are like, oh, we don't have learning and development here. We cut that out of the budget, or we're not engaging in professional conferences and learning. It just costs too much. And my response is always like, how do you actually put a dollar amount on the ability for your employees to learn and grow to keep the success of your organization alive? So I'm really excited to talk about this. And like you said, I have 3 action steps that I can share with you. But I could also share a little bit of a couple of stories or something if we want to go from there.
Well, let's start off with a couple stories about learning agility, and I'm happy to share some as well. And then we'll dive right into the 3 action steps.
Yeah, that sounds good. When I was thinking about this topic, Damon, it made me think about a book that I know is one of your favorite books and one of my favorite books. In fact, our first conversation, I don't know if you remember this, but our first conversation that you and I ever had, I call it a conversation. It didn't feel like an interview, but we talked about one of my favorite books, which is Ryan Holiday's The Obstacle is the Way. And it was published 10 years ago now, which is crazy. We did a book club on it last year at Learnit. And one of the things in that book, The Obstacle is the Way, the title comes from Marcus Aurelius, one of the ancient Greek Stoics, right? Talking about essentially that the things that look like they're problems in our pathways become the action forward that we need to take, right? And I think about that is such a perfect encapsulation. And ever since I read that book 10 years ago, that has become such a personal motto or ideology of if something looks like a problem, smells like a problem, tastes like a problem, touches like a problem, it looks like an obstacle, it's the thing that I need to learn to work through. I think for a lot of folks these days, that maybe is AI. That could be different technology systems, different ways of doing business. Certainly, 4 years ago, a lot of people learning how to work in a work from home virtual environment. But this is the path forward. And, I also think about, for me, the big game changer about learning agility. I'm sure that you read this book. I'm sure many of our listeners have as well, too. Malcolm Gladwell's The Tipping Point, which I had to look that up. That came out in 2000, which is nuts, right? Like that feels like it just came out a couple of years ago. But 24 years ago, good old Malcolm Gladwell, and he talked about the types of influencers within organizations. And this connects so much to learning agility. One of those types of influencers that he talked about are information mavens. And these are people who love to gather up a ton of information. And what they do is they help transform and reinvent themselves and influence those people around them. And that to me is such a perfect definition of learning agility. I think for me, it changed my thought of myself as a nerd or geeky or something like that to I'm an influencer with action. And for me, learning about information mavens, learning about learning agility absolutely has been one of the keys to my success over the last 20 plus years is my ability to learn and influence, grow has allowed me to do the things that I've been able to do in my career. So learning agility is absolutely the gas in the fuel tank for many individuals and organizations.
So, Mickey, can you give me an example of, like you just mentioned, that learning has helped you grow in your career? Do you have anything that stands out specifically?
Yeah, I mean, I think about something as simple as YouTube. I anywhere from fixing a broken refrigerator to, identify my early learning before there were courses and workshops about AI stuff. I think for both of us was watching a whole bunch of YouTube videos and kind of seeing who's out there talking about whatever. And the what I love about that is that you can go out to a place like YouTube or something and just look for other people like you that are talking about the topic that you're interested in. And people are genuinely interested in sharing their knowledge. And that has been transformational for me. I've learned so much from different folks that function in my role as a facilitator or trainer that has completely changed the way that I think about the work that I do. And these aren't folks that, I've not met them in real life. But again, learning agility is about kind of looking at opportunities to sponge up information in all sorts of different corners.
So, Mickey, let's look at it from the reverse. Let's say you're like in my book, I like to refer to learn it alls versus know it alls. If you're a know it all and you're not open to learning, what what are the downsides? What could happen to you as an individual in your career?
Yeah, yeah. The picture that I just got in my head, Damon, is somebody who's kind of painted into a corner, kind of backed into a corner. I think for certain periods of time, we can be relevant and subject matter experts on something. But if we don't continue to engage in learning and be willing to be flexible and Gumby and nimble like, right? What we do is we back ourselves into a corner and we close ourselves off. And those are the folks when I look around at people that I know, these are the folks that aren't accelerating in their careers. These are the organizations that aren't growing in the way that they wanted to. And I think so much of that comes from people's, I don't need to learn any new stuff, right? I'm mid career. I know everything that I need to know. I'm a vice president of fill in the blank. Well, the problem with that is that people see learning as a one and done sort of activity instead of being, an agile learner and seeing this as this is something we do every single day of the week.
No, I think that's great. And, obviously you and I are on the same page. One aha moment for me really was when I'm 52 now. And so when I was about 38, I've always been a big book reader. I kind of emulated my dad. He was a big book reader. But I was about 38 years old. And I was thinking to myself, why am I doing all this reading and studying and everything? And is there really that much more to learn? Is it make that much of a difference? And then I came across that great Gandhi quote, which was, live like you will die tomorrow, learn like you will live forever. And that really, for some reason, stuck with me. And I just accelerated my learning from there. And I got up to about 40 books a year. And, but one of the things I want to add, for our listeners out there, and we're going to get into the 3 steps in a second, but we had this guest on the show, David Katz, and one of my favorite quotes of all time is learning without doing is treason. So it's one thing to learn, but you also got to find a ways to process it and execute it. But let's start off with the learning part. What are the three actions that an individual can take to be a more agile learner?
Yeah, absolutely. And I love that story. And I love interview that you had with David. That has been a real ideology that I've taken on recently for myself as well. And these three action steps, Damon, that I'm going to share with you, they're going to start from the individual perspective, but they're going to the pathway forward is to the organizational piece. And so I encourage everybody who's listening and watching to think about, what does this mean for me, but what does this mean for us and in the organization or organizations you're part of? The first step that I encourage people to do, and I use this word sponge, right? Because that gives us such a good visual, but you think about a sponge sponging up liquid. Sponge up new information wherever you can, right? The traditional thing that a lot of folks think about is reading books, right? And you and I both incredibly avid readers, audiobooks, physical books, whatever it might be. Spending a lot of time on AI tools and doing queries, right? Oh my gosh, you can go down like very deep rabbit holes with your different queries. LinkedIn. I love different talk radio shows, YouTube videos, all this sort of stuff. The thing that I always tell people, though, is that you need to schedule this in and be intentional about it. You can't see learning as this tack on, add on, when I have some time sort of thing. These earbuds that I'm wearing are very small and nimble. I keep them in my pocket all the time. And the reason for that is I never know when I might have an opportunity to listen to 5 or 10 minutes of the audiobook that I'm working on or the podcast that I'm working through, right? Or, downloading stuff so that when I don't have data service, when I'm out walking in the woods or something like that, if I don't want to listen to the birds, I can listen to my podcast, right? But I have to schedule it into my calendar. You have to be intentional about that. There's very few people that just have time to sit back and read in a quiet sort of space, right? You and I both have young kids. There's no such thing, right? We have to build this into our lives, right?
Yeah,
The
and
second, yeah, go ahead.
what I'd like to add, for the first one, is for listeners out there. It's also important as you hear Mickey and I speak about what works for us. It's different for everyone. Everybody learns differently. So maybe reading isn't for you. Maybe you want to watch documentaries. Maybe you learn from being in the flow at work. Well, being in the flow at work is a really important one for all of us, but find what works for you. Don't force something. If you don't like reading a physical book and you spend an hour doing it and you don't retain anything, it's not worth your time. What I liked that you said, Mickey, about scheduling that time. I had a conversation with Andy Storch on this podcast as well. And Andy said that he carves out 15 to 25 minutes every morning reading. And that compound time has led him to read like an astronomical, when I say astronomical, maybe 30, 40 books a year. So I really think that taking the time and scheduling it and keeping to it, like for me, I like to read for 30 minutes every morning. That's my thing. I get it done. I also want to point out that having a growth mindset and being open, you could learn from everyone. So a lot of times my wife drags me to events that I don't want to go to, and sometimes I'm in a bad mood about it. But a lot of times I find myself in a situation with somebody talking about something, whether it's art or crypto, something that I know nothing about. It's okay to be vulnerable and say, hey, I don't know anything about this. But if you actually are present and you're asking questions and you're listening, that's another great opportunity to learn. So for you listeners out there, we're not talking about only learning, exactly job related things, but just being open to learning new stuff. Now let's move on to step number 2.
Yeah, step number 2, actually, you just mentioned it a minute ago, Damon, which is having a growth mindset. I think about for many of us, if we're truly honest with our life experiences, we've probably learned more from our failures and missteps and mistakes than the things that were just outright successes. Our mutual colleague and friend Meredith Bell had your friend Jay Dixon on talking about helping athletes transition into the professional world, right? And one of the things that he talked about that I just loved was this idea of a failure resume. This idea of like understanding and owning those things where you've had those missteps and like, what did you learn about that? And when I talk about growth mindset, the big takeaway for me, the thing that I would offer to everybody is this idea of the power of yet. If you add the word yet, this is a very small linguistic thing, but if you add the word yet at the end of I don't know how to, or I can't, or whatever that is, right? Essentially, what you're doing is you're opening the door and you're setting a pathway for where you could be into the future, right? So, like, I'm not an expert of blah, blah, blah yet, right? I haven't learned how to blank yet. And what that does is instead of closing yourself off from, here's these things that I don't know how to do, here's these things I haven't learned yet, here's these things I'm not excellent in, it's essentially saying, I'm getting there, right? Like we're all works in progress. So I think having a growth mindset is super important. Recognizing, learning. I know people say learn from your mistakes, but truly taking a look at it and saying, well, that didn't go particularly well. How do I dissect that, understand what that means? What do I do with it so that next time it goes from being a misstep or a failure to actually being something that's a catalyst for huge success in the future? Okay.
Yeah, I love that.
Step number two.
I love that step number two. Um, yeah, I hear a lot of great leaders say that the real learning takes place out of your comfort zone. Just getting out of your comfort zone, trying things, and like you said, if it doesn't work out, it's just not yet. Dan Turner, I know we're going on down our list. Dan Turner on an episode of the Learnit podcast said that failure is only failure if you don't try or you quit. And a lot of the best learnings come from going out there and trying things. So I think that's fantastic. So let's move on to step number three.
Yeah, step number three, and this is where we go kind of really moving from the individual to the group or to the organization. And that action step is to learn from and with other people. There's a great quote, Bill Nye, the science guy, we all know him, right? He talks about each person you meet knows something that you don't, right? And that's kind of what you talked about going to things that maybe I don't understand or whatnot. But if I can be curious, right? If I can kind of open myself up to everybody that I meet is going to teach me something that I don't already know, or they're going to speak about something in a way that I don't understand, right? We all learn things every single day in a way that was different from the day before, right? And when I talk about learning from other people, that's the easier part, right? Is absorbing books, watching videos, having conversations, grabbing a beer or coffee with somebody. But learning with other people is this idea of paying it forward, right? This is one of the things, and Damon, I'd love to ask you about this too. But this idea of kind of learning in community or learning within organizations, building learning cultures. One of the things that I think that we do very well at Learnit, but is this idea of I learned this thing, and I don't want to keep that to myself. I want to pass that back to everybody around me. And so here's this video. Here's a voiceover thing that I did of this. Here, I want to show everybody this, not just because we have not just because we're a learning and development company, but because we're a group of people that want to learn with and from each other. And so the idea of kind of gifting that on to somebody else, that's the third action step, is learning with and from other people. And Damon, I'd be curious, like, how would you recommend from your vantage point, how do we set this up within organizations? How do we build learning cultures within organizations?
Great question. And it's something that you and I love talking about. When it comes to building a learning organization, a Learn It All company, like we like to call them, it starts with leadership. It starts with the C level and it starts with the CEO. And I believe it means not that just they're setting aside funds and time for their team, but I think that the CEO and the other C-level suite need to roll up your sleeves and get involved in the learning and participate in it, join classes, or share podcasts that they've listened to, and then champion other people and recognize other people who are getting involved in learning. I think it all starts there. And like a lot of great leaders, I think you need to model the behavior of the team that you want to have. I mean, how can you expect people to dive into and learn all these things if you're not willing to participate yourself? I think that that's important. I also think it's important to, if you're trying to have it, permeate throughout the organization, is you want to find a couple champions, kind of find a couple people internally who are really willing to take accountability and set up, whether it's classes or mentorship programs. I mean, there's so many different ways to go about learning. There's you could work with Learnit for programs. Of course we love that. You could do coaching. One of the, if you're on a tight budget, one of the things that we like to do is we send somebody to a class. It doesn't even have to be a Learnit class. And then they come back and they teach it back. And so listeners, think about that, especially if you're a leader out there. Um, if you have a tight budget, send somebody to a conference or a class, have them come back and teach everybody else. It helps make their learning more sticky. And like you said, it gives a gift back to everybody else and it gets all these opportunities to learn. And I also think it's important that all learning shouldn't be just directly on task or work focused. Um, at Learnit, and I know a lot of other organizations do this as well. Um, they have a $1,000 to $2,000 budget maybe a year for an individual, and they're allowed to go take training in anything they want. Bringing it all back here, Mickey, what we're talking about is learning agility, building the muscle to continue to learn. It's one thing to pick up the skill, which is going to be irrelevant probably in 6 months, some of them. It's another thing to constantly being able to learn. So even if they're not learning something that's specific to their job role, it's still worth the investment as an employer, giving them the opportunity and get people hungry and excited about learning. And so those are some of the steps. I'm curious to hear if you have any stories that go along with this.
Well, Damon, it just made me think about you and I, we have some favorite books in common, but one of the topics that you and I both have in common that we like to learn a lot about is World War II. And again, I remember that from our first conversation. And I think about, and I've heard
We
you
talked a
mention
lot
this
in that first conversation.
we did. Yeah. Yeah. We sure did. I think we were hook, line, and sinker on each other at that point. But I think about, World War II, obviously it's many, many years have passed, right? 80 years since D-Day, right? Just a couple of months ago. But there's so much, this is a significant event of the past, but here we are in our present, still learning from the lessons of times 80 years ago, right? And like to me, that's another definition of learning and agility. And you talk about this, that it's not just about I'm learning this skill that's going to be really helpful for me in sales, this skill that's going to be really helpful for me in marketing. But like, what are we learning from past history or current events or whatever this is to be able to like fold that into life perspective, our ability to, convey information to influence other people. I think, that's the idea, as you said, like going to an art thing or learning about crypto or anything like that. It may not be something that I initially can see the pathways or the connections, but then all of a sudden it's you do see that connectedness. And that's what's so powerful about learning is you recognize after a while all of this stuff kind of interweaves together into who you are, how you present yourself, what you have to contribute to an organization, what you have to contribute to your friends and family too. So, I love that. And, it does make me think though, and, I mean, we're kind of, nerd talking to nerd here a little bit, but I want to circle back, Damon, and ask you a question about kind of this, the first action step I talked about was this idea of kind of sponging up as much as you can. And you talked about kind of being able to engage in learning however it makes it work. What are some suggestions or kind of how would you respond? I'll come at this from like the deficit mindedness. I'm sure that you've had some people in your life before have said like, yeah, Damon, that sounds awesome, but I don't have that kind of time in my day. I don't have that kind of time in my life right now. What do you say to those folks? Because I do feel like I hear that way more often now in the last couple of years than I do of people, over time.
Well, what I would say to those people, and this is going to be another one of the skills that we talk about in a future episode, self-awareness, is being honest with yourself, and a lot of times the people who say that they don't have time, they typically have a victim mentality, maybe even lack accountability sometimes. And I bet you if they sat down and they reflected on the time that they had throughout the day, yes, we're all busy, don't get me wrong, right? But instead of scrolling through Instagram or binging on Netflix at the end of the night, find time and carve out time. Listeners, I'm not saying you need to spend an hour. I mentioned earlier Andy Storch and 15, 25 minutes a day. You can find 25 minutes a day, whether it's listening to a podcast as you drive to the grocery store or you take your kid for a walk. You can find the time it takes to pick up some learning. And also you can do that at work too. I think that, a whole nother topic is around mentorship and coaching and all that kind of stuff. But, even virtually or if you're in person, if you are with a senior member of your team or even somebody junior, you know, listen and ask questions. These are all opportunities to learn. So I don't buy in the excuse at all when it comes to not being able to find time for learning. And I'm going to throw you back a question, Mickey, that just kind of popped in my head because it's tough to create a learning culture. But one of the things that helps with that is to whether you have it in your core values but you want to have it in the DNA of people who you bring on board. And hopefully, for all of those out here listening, yeah, you're probably a leader and you probably have team members who have it in their DNA. But as we continue to hire more, do you have any recommendations around questions to ask in the interview process or how you can kind of suss out people who have a learn it all attitude versus a know it all attitude?
Absolutely. Yeah. I mean, I think, yeah, assessing for learning appetite and learning agility skills, I think is super important, right? I mean, you had Elias Simpson on the podcast talking about, learning as the biggest competitive advantage. And we've talked a lot about that. I think one of the most important things that we can do is those nice open-ended questions that we can ask in initial interviews of, what are three things that you've learned recently and how did you learn that and what did you do with that knowledge? Again, I reference back to the very first conversation that you and I ever had, which is you asked me, what are some of your favorite books? What are you reading right now? And what have you done with that? You asked me that exact
Was that like a
question.
3 hour conversation? Because we talked about a lot that time.
It was a couple hours. It was we both steamrolled through some other stuff that we had going on that day, but when you ask somebody that, number one, that's not the typical interview questions that people are ready for. What's your strengths and weaknesses? Not that that's not important, because that is about self-awareness, which is another topic we're going to talk about. But um, what you're doing is you're assessing, number one, how quickly can somebody tell you what their favorite book is? How quickly, again, speed is not everything, but it's that tip of the tongue thing. If I can tell you, Damon, the book that I'm listening to right now is this, and every night when I'm putting my kids to sleep and they finally settle in and everything, I can't wait to get my earbuds in because, right? That allows me to know that this is somebody who's really interested in learning. And again, it doesn't have to be books, but so I think questions, and I think the other creative ways that you could ask people about that is, what are ways that you're looking to contribute back to the organization or contribute back to our industry or our field? That also gives me a sense of what are you doing outside of just earning your paycheck and earning your keep and doing your work within the organization. Obviously, we're all here because we're in service to the organization, but we are in service to an industry. We're in service to a field. We're in service to a community. And I think asking those types of questions as an interviewer, my ability to read and understand that would give me so much information about how does this person exist in their world, right? And I can think of and there's been some people that I have asked questions like that and they, stammer and hesitate over it or laugh and say, "Yeah, I don't really do that," right? Like that's not really my thing.
Or I don't
And
have time
that's
to read.
or I
Yeah.
don't have time, right? And my
It's a red
response is not
flag.
that it's yeah, it is a red flag. I mean, my response is I have a 1-year-old and a 3-year-old and a very busy life, and, like, this is a big value, but it's also a necessary value, I think, for a lot of people.
Yeah, I mean, one of the questions that I like to ask, and listeners, I think this is a good bonus one. It's kind of like what Mickey said, is share with me what personal development books do you have on your, on your bookshelf? And it's not about how fast they can answer it, but if they can answer it, um, that's great. And then take it another level. Okay, what did you learn and how did you apply that? I think that's a great question, to see if they read something and if they have an example or a story, how they applied it. Another question that I like to ask is asking somebody, hey, at your last company, did they have a formal training program? And so sometimes when people will come back and say yes or no, and if they said, especially if they said no, say, okay, your company didn't have a formal training program. What did you do on your own to continue to learn and grow? And the individuals who could right away say, well, you know what I did? I did this, this, and this. I invested in myself. I did this and this. Compared to the people who said, well, I didn't do anything because my company didn't take care of me. That's one of the reasons why I left. That that shows a lot about ownership right there. So those are a couple of key things. Now we're coming up on time. I want to kind of just recap and help me with the recap. Um, and then I'm going to have you end, Mickey, with going through the 3 action steps one more time. But we talked about so many great things. We talked about why it's so important to learn, the risks and pitfalls, what could happen to you personally and for your company if you don't have that learning mindset and that learning culture. We talked about how everybody learns differently, so you got to find something that works for you, how social learning and connection is important, how all these great things we talked about. So, Mickey, what else would you want to add to that we spoke about, and then take it home with going through the 3 steps one more time?
Yeah, I would double down on the social learning piece. I think learning in community, learning with each other, whether that's talking to your spouse, partner, kids, neighbors, being able to share with people what you've learned, whether it's something that's going on in your community, a person you met, a movie you watched, whatever that is. That's connectedness, right? Like that's our relationships. I don't know that people spend enough time in relationships with each other, not just kind of checklist talking through the things that we're supposed to talk to. So I think social learning is huge. But so that would be the one I would double down on. But if I can come back to, kind of bring things home with those 3 action steps, super critical. And I'd love for people, like drop us some comments, drop us a line with other action steps that you would suggest too. But the first one is to sponge up information wherever you can, wherever, right? Doesn't have to be traditional sources, books, workshops, anything like that. It can be really non-traditional sources too. The second one is having a growth mindset. Really looking at Jay Dixon's concept of a failure resume, looking at those missteps, those failures. What can I do to learn from those things? But also the power of yet. I don't know something yet, right? It gives you a runway, a pathway into the future for learning. And then that last one, again, I think the one that both you and I really want folks to hear, which is this idea of learning from and with other people. So, to do what you can to open yourself and kind of be opportunistic and curious with other people, and pay it forward, right? Bring what you're learning, bring it back to the people that you work with, the people that you work for, sharing videos, train the trainer sort of things. I love that concept. I used to have folks do that. If you go to a conference or something like that, you come back the next week, teach it to the rest of us, right? So those are the 3 big concepts. Learning agility, absolutely, I think, the competitive advantage for individuals as well as organizations, Damon.
Now, Mickey, you've been awesome here today, and we can go on forever and nerd out about this. Never in my wildest dreams did I think I would nerd out on learning, but I did, and have. How can our audience connect with you?
Yeah. Please look me up on LinkedIn, Mickey Fitch Collins, or you could just search Learnit and Mickey and you'll find me. I would absolutely love to connect with folks. Send me a message, whatever we can do, whatever I can do to help support you. I'm there for it.
And one of the things we didn't talk about, because I want you all to connect with me on LinkedIn as well, Damon Lemby, is the opportunities to learn and grow from the LinkedIn community, which is so important. You should follow Mickey because she puts out such great content. I do my best to as well. And for you leaders out there, I think it's important when you're in the interview process to see if you have people out there who are engaging on LinkedIn. That's another way to see if they have an appetite for learning. So this has been a great episode. What I'd like for everybody out there, couple things. If you like this episode, please subscribe, tell a friend, rate and review. I'd also like you to check out my book, The Learn It All Leader. We talk a lot about this, mindset, tools, and traits, The Learn It All Leader. Since this is a special episode on learning agility, go to learnit.com, and if you find a class that you want for yourself, send me or Mickey a DM and we'll send you a code to a free class. So take advantage of the learning opportunities that are out there for you. Make the opportunities for yourself. And until next time, everybody, stay curious and keep learning. Have a great day.